The mountain had stood there for centuries. It had watched generations grow old. It had survived storms, earthquakes, and countless winters. Then, one ordinary night, it moved. Not with an explosion. Not with a roar. But with a deep, terrifying sound that seemed to come from beneath the earth itself. People woke to trembling walls. Dogs barked into the darkness. Birds abandoned their nests. And within minutes, an entire village vanished beneath the mountain. No one could explain how it happened. No one could understand why. But years later, a forgotten journal uncovered a truth so disturbing that many wished it had remained buried forever. You're watching Origin Documentaries, where every story uncovers hidden truths, unforgettable journeys, and powerful life lessons. Stay with us until the end, because the final revelation changes everything. Of the mountain, hidden between towering cliffs and dense pine forests, stood the quiet village of Ash Hollow. It wasn't marked on many maps. Travelers rarely visited. Life there moved at a slower pace. The villagers believed the mountain protected them from the outside world. Children played beside crystal-clear streams. Farmers worked the fertile terraces carved into the hillsides. Every evening, smoke rose gently from stone cottages as families gathered around warm meals and shared stories passed down through generations. Among them lived Elias Carter, a 29-year-old schoolteacher who had returned to Ash Hollow after studying geology at a distant university. Unlike most villagers, Elias didn't believe every old legend. Science. Observation. But there was one story he could never completely dismiss. The elders often warned, "Never climb to the northern ridge after sunset." When Elias asked why, no one gave a clear answer. Some claimed strange lights appeared among the rocks. Others whispered they heard voices carried by the wind. The oldest residents simply lowered their eyes and changed the subject. For decades, no one questioned the tradition. Until strange events began happening. First came the animals. Sheep refused to graze near the mountain. Horses became restless without reason. Birds suddenly abandoned trees they had nested in for years. Even the village dogs howled through the night, staring toward the dark cliffs as though something invisible watched from above. Then the ground began trembling. Not violent earthquakes. Just brief vibrations. So subtle that cups rattled on wooden tables. Windows gently shook. Most villagers ignored them. "The mountain is alive," the elders said calmly. "It always speaks before winter." But Elias wasn't convinced. He climbed the nearby hills carrying notebooks and measuring equipment. He noticed fresh cracks spreading across ancient rock formations. Small stones rolled downhill where the ground had once been stable. Streams that had flowed in the same direction for decades suddenly changed course. Every observation pointed towards something unusual happening deep inside the mountain. When Elias shared his findings during a village meeting, few people listened. The mayor smiled politely. "Our grandparents lived here. Our parents lived here. And nothing has happened." Others nodded in agreement. Fear, they believed, came from imagination, not from mountains. Only one person took Elias seriously. An elderly widow named Martha Hale. She quietly handed him a weathered leather journal. "It belonged to my grandfather," she whispered. "He wrote everything he saw. But promise me, don't read the final pages after dark." Elias laughed softly. He didn't believe books could be dangerous. That night, rain tapped gently against his window as he opened the faded journal. The first pages described ordinary village life. Harvests. Festivals. Births. Then the handwriting suddenly changed. The words became hurried. Uneven. As though the writer had been terrified. The final readable sentence stopped Elias cold. The mountain is not falling, it is waking up. Before he could turn the next page, a deep rumble echoed beneath the house. The lamp flickered. Dust drifted from the ceiling. Outside, every dog in the village began barking at once. Cliffhanger. Elias rushed to the window. High above the village, a massive crack had appeared across the face of the mountain. And from somewhere deep inside it, a strange orange glow slowly emerged. The orange glow spread slowly through the giant crack, painting the mountainside in an eerie light that no one in Ash Hollow had ever seen before. The earth fell silent. Even the wind seemed to disappear. Then, another deep rumble rolled beneath the village. This time, it wasn't just Elias who felt it. Every family stepped outside. Every eye turned toward the mountain. And for the first time in generations, fear replaced faith. The first warning. Before sunrise, Elias climbed toward the northern ridge with his backpack, notebook, camera, and geological tools. Behind him, Martha Hale struggled to keep pace despite her age. "You should leave this mountain alone," she warned. "It has buried more secrets than anyone remembers." Elias looked back. "If there's danger, everyone deserves to know." The climb became more difficult with every step. Fresh cracks crossed the trail. Large boulders had fallen during the night, blocking paths that had existed for decades. Ancient pine trees leaned at strange angles as if the ground beneath them had shifted. The higher they climbed, the stronger the strange humming became. It wasn't loud. It was deep, almost like the heartbeat of the mountain itself. Hours later, they reached the ruins of an old stone watchtower overlooking the valley. Most villagers believed it had been abandoned centuries ago. Inside, Elias found faded maps carved into the stone floor. One drawing immediately caught his attention. It showed the entire village. But beneath it was another sketch. A huge underground chamber stretching directly below Ash Hollow. Across the drawing someone had carved 3 chilling words. "Never build here." Elias froze. The modern village stood exactly where the ancient warning had been placed. A terrifying discovery. Using a portable ground scanner, Elias examined the rocky surface around the tower. The results made his heart race. The mountain wasn't solid. Beneath it were enormous hollow spaces. Gigantic underground caverns extended for miles beneath the village. Some appeared unstable. Others looked as though they had already partially collapsed. If even one of those chambers failed, the entire mountainside could sink. Elias suddenly realized the old legends might have been based on forgotten knowledge rather than superstition. Strange lights after sunset. As darkness approached, Elias and Martha began their descent. Halfway down the trail, Martha suddenly grabbed his arm. "Don't move!" Far across the valley, small orange lights floated silently above the forest. They drifted between the trees without making a sound. 1. Then 5. Then dozens. Elias quickly raised his camera. But every photograph appeared completely black. When he lowered the camera, they were still there. Watching. Waiting. Panic in Ash Hollow. Back in the village, people gathered in the central square. More cracks had appeared between the stone houses. Water from the village well had turned cloudy. Animals refused to enter their barns. Children cried without knowing why. The mayor still tried to calm everyone. "It's only a small earthquake. It will pass." But before he finished speaking, the church bell began ringing by itself. No one was near the rope. The sound echoed across the valley. Then, the mountain answered. A deafening roar shook the ground so violently that people fell to their knees. Dust clouds rolled down the cliffs. Huge rocks crashed into the forest. The entire village watched in horror as another massive crack split open high above them. The hidden pages. That night, Elias returned to Martha's house and opened the final sealed pages of the old journal. The paper was stained and brittle. The last entry read, "If these words are ever found, leave immediately. We ignored the warning, and the mountain claimed us. It does not swallow villages in a single night. It gives signs one by one. When the glowing cracks appear, there is no time left." Elias looked up slowly. Outside, the ground began shaking again. Only this time, it didn't stop. Cliffhanger. A thunderous explosion echoed through the valley. The mountainside started collapsing. From the center of Ash Hollow, a terrified child screamed, "The ground is opening!" Elias ran toward the village, not knowing that the next few minutes would decide who lived, and who would disappear beneath the mountain forever. The first house disappeared without a sound. It didn't explode. It didn't collapse. It simply sank, as if invisible hands beneath the earth had pulled it into the darkness. Within seconds, terrified screams echoed across Ash Hollow. The mountain was no longer warning the villagers. It had begun to take them. The ground breaks open. Elias sprinted through the village as cracks raced across the streets like lightning. Stone walls crumbled. Windows shattered. The ancient church leaned dangerously to one side. Families rushed into the open, carrying children and whatever they could grab. Some fell to their knees in panic. Others froze, unable to believe what they were witnessing. The mountain they had trusted for generations had suddenly become their greatest enemy. The race to save the villagers. "Everyone to the southern bridge!" Elias shouted. His voice was almost drowned out by the thunder beneath the ground. Several villagers joined him, guiding children and elderly residents away from the collapsing houses. Martha Hale refused to leave. "The journal," she whispered. "It contains the rest of the truth." Ignoring the danger, Elias rushed back into Martha's shaking home. Books crashed from the shelves. The ceiling cracked above him. He grabbed the weather journal just as a massive beam crashed behind him, blocking the doorway. Dust filled the room. For a terrifying moment, he thought he would never escape. With one desperate leap, Elias climbed through a shattered window seconds before the house disappeared into a widening sinkhole. The hidden cavern. The shaking grew even stronger. Suddenly, the ground beneath the village square collapsed, revealing a gigantic underground cavern. Thousands of years of hidden history lay exposed. Massive stone pillars supported enormous chambers beneath the mountain. Ancient stairways descended into darkness. Carved walls stretched farther than anyone could see. It looked less like a cave, and more like the remains of a forgotten underground city. The villagers stared in complete silence. Their ancestors had built directly above something they never knew existed. The final pages. Safe on higher ground, Elias opened the last pages of the journal. The final entry revealed a forgotten truth. More than 200 years earlier, another settlement had stood in exactly the same place. Its people had noticed the same warning signs: cracks, strange sounds, frightened animals, and shifting streams. They had escaped just before the mountain collapsed. Before leaving, they carved warnings into the watchtower and buried journals, hoping future generations would never rebuild there. But over time, the disaster faded into legend. The warnings were forgotten, and history quietly repeated itself. A desperate escape. The collapse accelerated. Entire sections of the valley dropped several meters. Bridges snapped. Trees slid into the widening chasm. Elias counted every survivor as they crossed the southern ridge. One family was still missing. Without hesitation, he ran back toward the edge of the collapsing village. Inside the remains of a small cottage, he found a frightened young girl trapped beneath a fallen wooden beam. Working against time, Elias lifted the heavy timber while another villager pulled the child free. Moments later, the cottage vanished into the earth behind them. The mountain gave them only seconds. The mountain's secret is revealed. As dawn broke, the violent shaking finally began to weaken. From the safety of the ridge, Elias looked back. Ash Hollow no longer existed. In its place stretched a vast basin of broken rock, fallen trees, and clouds of dust. The mountain had not swallowed the village by magic. Centuries of hidden underground caverns, unstable rock layers, and slow geological movement had finally reached their breaking point. Nature had been sending warnings for years. The villagers simply didn't understand them. Yet one mystery remained. If the previous survivors had escaped, who had hidden the journal inside Martha's family home? And why had someone sealed the final page with a message that seemed written for Elias himself? Cliffhanger. As rescue teams arrived days later, one engineer made a startling discovery. Deep inside the newly exposed cavern, a sealed stone doorway stood untouched. Across its surface was an ancient symbol identical to the one carved inside Martha's journal. When the heavy stone door shifted open by just a few inches, a cold wind rushed out from the darkness. Someone heard what sounded like footsteps coming from deep inside the mountain. The footsteps stopped. Silence filled the cavern. Every rescue worker stood frozen, their flashlights fixed on the narrow opening in the ancient stone doorway. No one spoke. No one moved. Then, a cold gust of air escaped from the darkness, carrying the smell of damp stone and centuries of forgotten history. Whatever lay beyond that door had remained untouched for generations. Until now. The expedition begins. 2 days after the disaster, geological experts arrived to investigate the massive collapse. Elias joined the scientific team, carrying Martha's journal in his backpack. The newly exposed cavern was unlike anything they had expected. Towering rock chambers stretched hundreds of feet beneath the mountain. Crystal clear underground streams flowed silently between ancient stone walls. The deeper they walked, the stranger everything became. The walls were covered with faded carvings. Some showed families leaving the valley. Others showed the mountain collapsing over homes that looked almost identical to Ash Hollow. It was as though someone had recorded the disaster long before it happened. The lost sanctuary? After hours of exploring, the team reached an enormous underground hall. Massive stone columns supported the ceiling. Broken pottery, handmade tools, and weathered wooden furniture lay scattered across the floor. It wasn't a natural cave. It had once been a hidden settlement. A sanctuary built by people who understood the mountain's danger. One archaeologist whispered. They weren't hiding from the outside world. They were hiding from the mountain itself. Elias slowly opened Martha's journal. One passage matched the chamber perfectly. When the earth begins to breathe, leave everything behind. The mountain always gives one final chance. The final warning. Near the center of the chamber stood a large stone monument. Its surface was covered with symbols. Among them was an inscription that Elias managed to partially translate. It read, "Do not mistake silence for safety. The mountain sleeps. It never dies." The words sent chills through the entire team. The ancient people hadn't believed the mountain was alive. Instead, they had learned through experience that the landscape followed natural cycles of instability. Their warning had become legend over time. The science had been forgotten. But the danger remained. The secret of Martha's journal. As Elias examined the final pages more closely, something unexpected slipped from the journal. Hidden between 2 pages was a folded map. On the back, a handwritten message read, Elias realized the journal had never been meant for Martha. It had been preserved for whoever would finally understand the clues. Generations of one family had quietly protected the journal, waiting for the right person to uncover its message. Martha hadn't inherited a family secret. She had inherited a responsibility. A lesson written in stone. Scientists spent weeks studying the collapsed mountain. Their research confirmed that the disaster had been caused by a vast network of underground caverns, unstable rock layers, groundwater erosion, and years of gradual geological movement. The strange animal behavior, the cracked roads, the shifting streams, and the deep underground vibrations had all been warning signs. Nature had spoken. The villagers simply didn't know how to listen. The tragedy wasn't caused by a curse. It was caused by forgotten knowledge. A new beginning. Months later, the survivors built a new community far from the unstable mountain. At the entrance stood a simple stone monument. Not to remember destruction, but to remember wisdom. Children were taught both the old legends and modern geology. They learned that stories can preserve knowledge. And science can explain why those stories exist. Elias became a teacher once again. This time, his classroom wasn't just about books. It was about ensuring that history would never be forgotten again. Cliffhanger. On the day the new village officially opened, a young child exploring the edge of the old valley discovered something buried beneath the soil. It was another weather journal. Its cover carried the same mysterious symbol. But this journal had never been opened. Across its first page were just 6 handwritten words. This was only the first mountain. This was only the first mountain. The 6 handwritten words echoed in Elias's mind. How could there be another mountain? Another hidden danger? Another forgotten warning? As the morning fog drifted across the ruined valley, Elias realized the greatest mystery had never been the collapse of Ash Hollow. It was why someone had spent centuries leaving messages for people who had not yet been born. The second journal. The weather journal was carefully opened inside a temporary research center. Unlike Martha's journal, its pages had survived almost perfectly. The handwriting belonged to a different author. The first page began with a chilling sentence. If you are reading this, our village is already gone. The room fell silent. Every scientist leaned closer. The journal described travelers who had crossed mountain ranges centuries earlier. They had discovered that dangerous landscapes often left warning signs long before disaster struck. Instead of recording those signs in scientific books, which many people would never read, they turned them into stories, symbols, and local traditions so future generations would remember. Over time, the stories survived. But their true meaning was forgotten. The final discovery. Weeks of exploration inside the exposed cavern uncovered something extraordinary. Hidden behind the ancient stone doorway was a chamber unlike any other. It wasn't filled with treasure. It wasn't a royal tomb. It was an archive. Hundreds of carefully carved stone tablets lined the walls. Each tablet recorded observations about earthquakes, landslides, underground water, unstable cliffs, and changing landscapes. The ancient people had become careful observers of nature. Without modern technology, they had learned to recognize patterns that could save lives. Their greatest treasure wasn't gold. It was knowledge. When legends become science. As researchers translated more of the carvings, a remarkable picture emerged. Many of the so-called mountain legends were actually practical safety lessons. Stories about restless animals reflected unusual changes in the environment. Warnings about glowing cracks described rare geological events. Tales of forbidden valleys encouraged people to avoid unstable terrain. What later generations called myths. Elias smiled as he closed Martha's journal. The mountain never spoke, he quietly said. People simply forgot how to understand its language. Ash Hollow lives on. 1 year later, the new village flourished on safer ground. The children no longer feared the mountain. Instead, they studied it. A small museum displayed Martha's journal, copies of the ancient stone carvings, geological maps, and photographs of the old village. Visitors came from around the world, not to see a place destroyed by fear, but to learn how knowledge, tradition, and science could work together. Every year, the villagers gathered at sunrise overlooking the valley. Not to mourn what had been lost, but to remember what had been learned. The last lesson. Standing above the quiet valley, Elias watched the wind move through the pine trees. Nature had never been their enemy. It had always been speaking. Through the movement of rivers. Through cracks in the rocks. Through the silence of frightened animals. Through the slow changes most people failed to notice. The tragedy of Ash Hollow was not that a mountain collapsed. The tragedy was that its warnings were forgotten. And perhaps that is the greatest lesson of all. History is not only written in books. Sometimes it is written in the landscape beneath our feet. Emotional conclusion. Every generation inherits two choices: to ignore the lessons of the past, or to learn from them before history repeats itself. The people of Ash Hollow lost their homes. But they left behind something far more valuable. A reminder that curiosity saves lives. That knowledge matters. And that the greatest discoveries are often hidden where few people choose to look. Because sometimes, the most powerful stories are not about treasure. They are about truth. Ending. Every story teaches us something. Some stories entertain us. Others stay with us forever. If today's documentary moved you, surprised you, or made you think differently, please support Origin Documentaries by liking this video, sharing it with someone who loves powerful stories, and telling us your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoy premium documentary storytelling, subscribe to Origin Documentaries and turn on notifications so you never miss our next journey. Thank you for watching. Until next time, stay curious. Keep learning. See you in the next documentary.